So here we are in the Dickens pub at the English Inn.
One of our favorite places in Lansing.
Yes, it's like this little 15-person pub. Pub prices on the Grand River. We've had a lot of conversations in this place.
A lot of good burgers, a lot of good food.
Yes.
And drinks.
We've come here to celebrate. We've come here to cry, and we've had, it's been a really special place for us.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm excited to have this conversation with you about spiritual intimacy in the Dickens pub.
Love it. It's great. It's perfect.
So we met on January 18th of 1995 at the Boys and Girls Club on the south side of Chicago in the Dearborn Projects.
As volunteers for a student ministry through Wheaton College.
Exactly. So while we were at the projects, we both kind of met in this place where racial and economic justice was a really important thing to both of us before we even met. It's been a theme of our marriage ever since.
Yeah. Yep. And then by this point, I soon graduated and then was working as the youth director up at a big church in northern Michigan. And eventually we got married up there on May 31st, 1997. While we were still children. Got an apartment, started our life up there, and you joined the church to work there too.
I moved into your apartment with your culture in small town northern Michigan.
My family
your
nearby.
Family culture. Yep. Like I was like a fish out of water. I had kind of a losing myself experience, not sure who I was about a year or two into it.
So eventually you came on staff at the same church I was working at, which was Petoskey United Methodist Church. And it was manifestly clear to both of us that there are two leaders in this relationship and zero followers. But I was the director of youth ministry and you were the kind of broader director of ministries. In 2000, we bought a house and began practicing Christian hospitality. So we invited an older gentleman from the homeless shelter where you were volunteering to actually come and live with us. And and so adventures in all of that began.
We've been doing that in some form or fashion ever since.
And then in 2003, I had pulled back from full-time ministry at that point to start freelancing, and I published my very first book, Walking with Frodo.
In 2005, we moved to Durham, North Carolina, where I went to seminary until 2008. In 2007, you decided to get an MTS at Duke Divinity School as well.
My Master's of Theological Studies.
Duke Divinity Blue Devils.
Yes, go Blue Devils.
And in 2009, I was appointed as the pastor of Sycamore Creek.
So we moved then from Durham, North Carolina to the suburbs of Lansing to Holt, Michigan. And that's where Adventures in Ministry at Sycamore Creek began. It was pretty clear to us pretty soon that this was a time to maybe start a family. We had never really felt driven or called to do that before. And in 2010, we had Micah John, our eldest. And then just a few years later, we had Sam, our youngest.
Fast forward several years, and in 2022, Sycamore Creek, after having multiple campuses, decided to adopt another church and launch a new campus across from Eastwood Town Center, which became our Eastwood campus. And you and I moved with our kids from Holt into Lansing proper in Groesbeck neighborhood.
13 years in Holt, and now we are residents of Lansing, and our kids go to Lansing Public Schools.
Throughout these many, many years we've been married, I think we're coming up on 28, we have consistently chosen spiritual intimacy, consistently chosen to do practices and things that build spiritual intimacy in our relationship, our marriage.
Yeah. And spiritual intimacy feels kind of like a big term. Like, what does that actually mean? And so that's what our message is about.
So what is spiritual intimacy? And our oldest son, Micah, maybe hits it on the head at some level. On our 23rd anniversary, I asked him, why do you think mom and dad have been married for 23 years? And he said, his first answer was, we grow close to God together. He also said, we greet each other when we come in the room or in the morning. He said, we talk about it when we're frustrated and we're kind to each other. I mean, that could just be a 4-point sermon outline right there,
Sure.
right out of the
Good
mouth of our
definition
son.
of spiritual intimacy.
But what we
Absolutely.
really want to dive into is this idea that we grow closer to God together.
Yeah. So I kind of picture it like God is the top of a mountain, and our individual goal is to draw closer to God. And the closer you go up the mountain towards God, and the closer I get towards the top of the mountain, we're actually getting closer to each other, even if we're on our own unique path.
Mm-hmm.
And so in your pursuit of a deep relationship with God and my pursuit, it in fact draws us closer to each other, not just to God.
Yeah. I asked AI to make this image, but before it made this image, it made a different image of which God is like a deformed old white guy in the sky at the top of the triangle. The woman is gracefully running up the side of the triangle with her robes flowing, while the man is naked inside of the triangle climbing the mountains.
Atlas holding it all up or something.
That's what our future overlords think of.
The future overlords.
Intimacy.
Women are just naturally on this like effortless journey towards God, and men are clawing their way through the bowels of the earth.
So what is spiritual intimacy in marriage? Here's a quick definition. Spiritual intimacy develops when there is a shared commitment to discipleship and mission, or you could say calling, in your marriage.
So I feel like the word discipleship is very churchy, and it's worth unpacking that a little bit. And, as I'm leading Kids Creek downstairs and we're doing stories about Jesus, specifically about Jesus this year from the New Testament, we talk about the disciples, and these are the people that follow Jesus. And it wasn't just the 12 dudes. There were crowds of people that followed Jesus. And they wanted to get close to him because not only for his wisdom, but there was something about his personality and demeanor that they wanted to be like. And so they wanted to, a disciple is somebody who not only wants to learn from, but also wants to become like the person that they're following. And so marriage as discipleship is the opportunity for both people in a partnership to be growing more and more like Jesus, both individually and together. And that spiritual formation, that marriage is sort of a crucible or a garden for that kind of growth.
So at its best, marriage is learning to love your spouse with the same unconditional love that God loves us. And you are learning something about God's love. You're learning something about, unconditional love. You're a disciple of love in this commitment of marriage. So choosing spiritual intimacy is not just discipleship, it's also mission and calling. What is God's mission through your spouse to the world? And what is God's mission through your marriage to the world?
Mm-hmm. And what role do each of you play in that mission coming to fulfillment? Mm-hmm. And then as you think about both of you in a relationship, what is your level of commitment individually to working towards that mission?
Yeah. So spiritual intimacy is nurtured when the two together are committed to that mission and vision, both again through the spouse, but also through the marriage to the world. That creates this really strong bond of spiritual intimacy.
Yeah. Yeah. And in some ways, you're pastoring, you're kind of a shepherd for your spouse. Like you're co-pastoring in this together.
All right, so we like to stop in the middle of messages, give people a chance to chat. So we invite you to turn to your neighbor or put in the comments your answer to this question. If your life had a mission statement, what would it be? And if you're married, what would your marriage's mission statement be? Let's talk about it.